Hello everyone, welcome to today's session. Today we are going to see Class 12 Biology Chapter 6 Evolution. Okay students, I want you to imagine something. What if I told you that human beings you see today were not always exactly the same as they are now? Or what if I told you that Earth has a history of about 4.6 billion years and life on Earth has been changing throughout this enormous period? And here's the most interesting question. If life has changed over millions of years, then how did it happen? How did a tiny change in a population eventually contribute to the incredible diversity of life we see today? So today we are going to travel through time, literally millions of years, in order to understand one of the most fascinating ideas in biology. There's nothing but evolution. So get ready because this is not just a chapter about fossils and old organisms. So this is a story of how life changes. Yeah. Are you ready for the time travel? Yes. Let's move on. I'll say in the form of a story. So it will be easy for you to understand. Yes. Let's start our time travel. So now let's meet the scientist who changed the way humans thought about life. Who is he? He is Charles Darwin. So here's one question for you. Imagine you travel to an island and discover that the same type of bird has different beaks on different islands. Let's take your favorite bird and think and see. Why would that happen? Did the birds decide to change their beaks? No, of course not, right? So Darwin noticed something similar during his famous voyage on the HMS Beagle. So he observed organisms in different environments and started asking questions. Why are organisms different? Why do some survive better than others? Or why do some species disappear completely? And most importantly, could all these living organisms be connected through a common history? See, these questions led Darwin to one of the most important ideas in biology. It's evolution by natural selection. Okay, let's do a small imagination experiment. Yes, so imagine there are 100 green insects living on green leaves. So among them, 10 insects are slightly darker. Suddenly, what happened? Environment changed. So the leaves became darker. Now, which insects are easier for predators to see? The lighter ones, right? So the dark insects, yeah, they have a better chance of escaping from predators. So they survived, they reproduce, and also their offsprings, they may inherit the characteristics that help them to survive. So after many generations, what do you think happens? Yeah, the population may contain more dark colored insects. So did the insects consciously decide to become darker? No, right? See, the variation was already present and the environment favored one variation over another. So that is the basic idea of natural selection. So always remember, nature does not create the variation because it is needed. Nature selects from the variation that exists. Okay. So next we are going to see evidence from fossil. Now imagine you are a detective. So instead of investigating a crime that happened yesterday, you are investigating something that happened millions of years ago. So your clues, what are your clues now is fossils. A fossil is like a message from the past. So when scientists discover fossil in different layers of the rocks, where he discovered in different layers of the rocks, yeah, they study them and ask what lived here, when did it live? Did it become extinct? How was it different from organisms living today? So the deeper and older rock layers, they often contain fossils of organisms that lived much earlier in Earth's history. So fossils, they act like a time machine, we can say. So they allow the scientists to look back into the history of life. And sometimes fossils even show organisms with the characteristics that help us to understand transition between groups. Yeah, help us to understand the transition between groups. So when you see a fossil, don't just think of it as an old bone. Okay, think of it as a piece of evidence in the giant detective story of evolution. And here is some exam tip. So how will you determine the age? So age of the fossils are determined using the method of radioactive dating. Yeah. So next we are going to see homologous organ. So now look at your own hand. Look at your whale's flipper. Now think about a bat's wing. So, and finally, think about the forelimb of a cheetah. Okay. So, at first glance, how they look completely different, right? So, in this one helps us to hold things, and another one, yeah, helps a whale to swim, and also one helps a bat to fly, and another helps a cheetah to run, right? But if you look inside, something surprising happens, no? We find a similar basic arrangement of bones. So here's the question: how can structures which completely different functions have such a similar basic design? It's nothing. Answer is very simple. Is evolutionary history. So these structures are called as homologous organs. So they suggest that different organisms may have inherited a basic structural pattern, a basic structural pattern from a common ancestor and modified it over generations. Yeah, basic structural pattern from a common ancestor and it modified over generations. So here so many examples, everything we have given. So go through. So what you should remember is homologous means same basic plan, different job. And it led to divergent evolution. Okay. So next let us see this analogous organs. So now let's flip the situation. Imagine a bird flying through the sky. Okay. And also imagine a butterfly flying through the same sky. Both can fly. Yeah. Same function. Am I right? But did they inherit their wings from the same recent ancestor? No, no, no. Because their wings have very different structural origins. So here, job is same but different design. So that's the basic idea of analogous organs. And this is also associated with the convergent evolution. And it is almost like two students solving the same problem. Just think about your class, yeah? Two students solving the same problem using completely different methods. The result may be similar, but the approach is different. So always remember, homologous means same basic structure and different function. Analogous means different basic structure and similar function. So this comparison is very important, yeah. Sometimes you'll have confusion in this, yeah. Be clear in this concept. So next we are going to see more evidence, embryology and selection. Yeah. Let's talk with the embryological support or embryological evidence we can say. So first of all, what is an embryo first? What is an embryo? An embryo is a early stage of development of an organism. Early stage of development of an organism before it is born or hatches from an egg. Right. So when scientists compare the embryos of different vertebrates like fish, frog, reptiles, birds and humans, they notice that in the early stages they all look surprisingly similar. How they were looking? They were looking surprisingly similar. For example, vertebrates embryo, yeah, they show structures such as pharyngeal arches, nothing but gills, and also tail during the early development. So this observation led the German scientist Ernst Haeckel, who is he? Ernst Haeckel, to suggest that these similarities support evolution. And also he proposed the idea ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. What it means? See, an embryo repeats the evolutionary history of its ancestors during development. Okay, but later another scientist named Carl Ernst von Baer, he carefully studied embryos and he found that Haeckel's interpretation was not correct. So von Baer showed that embryos do not pass through the adult stages of other animals. Instead, embryos of different vertebrates are simply similar during the early stages and become increasingly different as development continues. So students always remember these things are very important for your exam point of view. Next we are going to see the artificial selection. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen different breeds of dog? Think of a German Shepherd, Labrador, Pug, Beagle or Husky. Yeah, they all look very different, don't they? But surprisingly, they all belong to the same species. So how did so many different breeds appear? His answer is very simple. Artificial selection is also called as selective breeding. So in artificial selection, humans chose plants or animals with desirable characteristics and breed them repeatedly. For example, if a farmer wants sweeter mangoes, he selects trees producing sweeter fruits and grows them generation after generation, right? And similarly, people have bred dogs for different purposes, for guarding or hunting, herding, or companionship. So after many generations, these selected tribes became more common, producing many different breeds. So now this made Darwin think, this made Darwin think, if humans can produce such large changes in just a few hundred years by selecting desirable traits, then imagine what nature can do over millions of years, right? So amazing, no? So next we are going to see industrial melanism. So now let's imagine that you are a bird living in England. Yeah, you are a bird living in England. You are looking for your next meal. You see a light colored moth sitting on a dark tree trunk. Is easy to spot? Yes, it's easy to spot. But next to it there is a dark colored moth. Yeah, so it's much harder to see, right? So now imagine the environment changes because of some industrial pollution. Yeah, so the tree trunks became darker. Suddenly the situation changes. The dark colored moth becomes harder to spot. The light color moth becomes easier to spot. So the environment has changed, and when the environment changes, what happens? The advantage of a particular variation can also change. See, this is the beauty of natural selection. See, the moth did not say, oh, the trees are getting darker, I need to change my color. Is it possible? No, it's not possible. So the variation existed and the environment influenced which individuals were more likely to survive and reproduce, right? So that is why industrial melanism is such a classic example of natural selection in action. Next, we are going to see anthropogenic action. We can say like it is like an antibiotic resistance, yes, which connected to the real life. Now let's come. This is a very important thing. Yeah, they may ask you in board examination also. Just imagine a population of bacteria. See, most bacteria are sensitive to an antibiotic, but few may already have variations that make them resistant. But when the antibiotic is used, the sensitive bacteria are eliminated. Only the resistant bacteria may survive. See, now those survivors reproduce. So over time, what happens? The population can contain a greater proportion of the resistant bacteria. So when we say the antibiotic made the bacteria resistant, see, that is not exactly correct. The antibiotic did not intentionally create a resistance. Instead, it created a selection pressure which favored the bacteria that were already resistant. So this is a very important concept, yes. So variation first, selection is later. That's why evolution is not just something what happened millions of years ago. See, it is a process we can observe in the modern world too. So let's have a quick revision. So special creation is a religious view. Yes, and also Earth, it was approximately 4,000 years old. And Charles Darwin, he went in a voyage in HMS Beagle and he proposed the natural selection. And the natural selection is the fitter individuals, yeah, leave more progeny. And then fitness by Charles Darwin is nothing but the ability to leave more offspring. And Alfred Wallace so independently propose the natural selection and fossils remains of hard parts in the rocks. On a homologous organ, same structure, different function. Analogous organs, different structure, same function. And industrial melanism, dark moss favor after industrialization. And anthropogenic evolution is antibiotic resistance or a pesticide resistance, and the evolution is stochastic, not directed. So we have come to the conclusion part. Hope you enjoyed the story format. Yes, comment in the comment box. If any doubt, you can ask me. Yes. So thank you. We'll see you in the next session.